to people who are existentially interested in the same kind of way that I am in this material. I'm going to be talking about the Bhagavad Gita, but somewhat indirectly, I'm going to be talking about some of the issues involved in interpreting the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm going to look at this one scholar, Madhusudana Sarasvati, who I will introduce to you, but I can't stress what a significant figure he is in the history of Indian philosophy and theology. He really is one of the greats, and we'll come back to that. And we're going to look at his understanding of the Bhagavad Gita. For those of you that aren't familiar, Bhagavad Gita is one of the most important Hindu scriptures. It's read by millions every day and recited and indeed memorized all over India and around the world as the divine teachings of Krishna, a great avatar, the incarnation of God on earth. And the aspect of that teaching that we're going to be looking at is Bhakti. And again, for those of you that are not familiar with this, Bhakti means a attitude, a path, a spiritual path of loving devotion and surrender to God, your supreme deity, as a method of salvation, as what in the Hindu tradition would be called a yoga, a spiritual practice. So we're going to looking especially at what Madhusudana has to say about the place of bhakti, loving devotion, as situated in the commentarial tradition of the Bhagavad Gita. And I hope the lights aren't too bright for you all to read. I'm going to start by looking a little bit at the one of the other, and perhaps the most famous commentator. Madhusudana is a little less famous. Shankara, who the tradition looks to as one of the foremost exponents, and indeed the founding exponent of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means something like non-dualism, a philosophy of radical unity of spirit with the world and with the inner self. And we'll talk more about that as we continue. This is an excerpt from the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita by this early and greatest proponent of Advaita, Shankara. And this is from roughly the 8th century of the Common Era. And in this passage, which I take as key to Shankara's attitude towards bhakti, towards loving devotion, this passage is key, I think, to understanding. And what he's saying here is he's talking to someone about someone who has definitively known himself to be the Lord, to be, in essence, God. And that's Advaita language, friends, okay? Aham Brahm Asmi, like I am it, but not in an egotistical way. Okay? So this, what he's saying here is, if I have known myself to be God, why would I wish to be subordinate to anyone, even God? Because an attitude of subordinance to God would be to deny my identity with God. That would contradict my awareness of myself as being identical with the ultimate. So this is from the point of view of many theological traditions in India, that are inclined toward devotion and do not like this idea of identity with God, this is offensive. And it might be offensive certainly would be offensive to a Christian or a Muslim who would say, wait a minute, this guy's claiming identity with God. That's heresy. That's certainly radical. Nowadays we don't burn heretics at the stake, we just take them to county mental health. So here's an attitude. I think you can see how this undercuts an attitude of loving devotion to God. If you are God, how do you love God? Love seems to require a relationship, subject and object. Fast forward 8 centuries later, we're looking at North India primarily, a flowering of devotionalism, a flowering of Bhakti traditions, particularly Krishna Bhakti. And here's a new take on this problem. Duality is bondage prior to liberation, but it's wisdom after liberation, after you attain knowledge of your identity with God. You can assume duality for the purposes of devotion. What does that mean? Assume duality means assume a difference. You and God, hey, if there's a difference, here's you and here's God, then you can love God, you can worship God, all that kind of stuff. So the whole apparatus of ordinary religious life assumes a kind of duality. I'm loving God, I'm looking to God for salvation, I'm looking to God for guidance and so on. So that's the contrast that I'm laying out here by way of starting. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Madhusudana. This is one of my favorite pictures. I took it in Vrindavan at a small household shrine in the 70s. A long time ago. Madhusudana lived 16th, 17th century. He's a prolific author, and as I said, one of the greats, perhaps the last great teacher of the Advaita, non-dualistic Vedanta tradition in the classical period. And he's written a number of very important works, especially the Advaita Siddhi, which, it's important to note, was a highly polemic, logically reasoned, vociferously argued refutation of devotional religion. In this case, the Madhva tradition of Dvaita, dualism. So he wrote this refutation of devotion. Siddhanta Bindu Vedanta Kalpalatika Sankshepa Shariraka Sara Sagraha. Even I got through that. And these are some of his very important works, like super orthodox, mainstream, follower of Shankara, looked at by all the authorities as authentic Advaita. Then he wrote these other 2 works. One is the Gudartha Dipaka, which is his commentary on the Bhagavad-Gītā. It means the light on the hidden teaching of the Bhagavad-Gītā. And then he wrote this other work called Bhakti Rasayana. And that means something like the elixir of devotion. Rasayana is like an Ayurvedic medicine potion. It could also mean, as a kind of a pun or a double entendre, the course of Bhakti Rasa. And we'll talk a little bit about that if we have time. These are the 2 works I'm going to talk about. His commentary on the Gita and the Bhakti Rasayanam, which was an independent work. Actually, the first and probably only serious independent writing on Bhakti by any of the great Advaita Vedanta teachers. As I say, he was a great scholar. Here's a great poem that was said to be written by a Pandit of Akbar's court. Madhusudana was a contemporary of Akbar. You've heard of Sarasvati, the goddess of wisdom. This is saying Madhusudana alone knows the limits of Sarasvati, and only Sarasvati knows the limits of Madhusudana. Heavy duty compliment. Great, extraordinary intellect. And that shows you the kind of a person that we're dealing with. The interesting thing about Madhusudana was he was kind of a 9-to-5 Advaitin. And then on his free time, he was a fervent devotee of Krishna. I suspect that's a little bit artificial, but you get the point. He was officially a great teacher of Pakka, orthodox, strict Advaita, but a great devotee. If some yogis, their minds, beautiful poem, their minds controlled by the practice of meditation, see that attributeless, actionless, supreme light, let them see it. For me, may that wondrous blue effulgence that runs and plays on the banks of the Yamuna long be the delight of my eyes. Who's the blue effulgence? Krishna. And this is a very famous verse. And check this out. This verse is in the Advaita Siddhi, this polemic against devotion. Think about that, okay? And it's at the end of a chapter that argues for Brahman being near Akara, formless, right? And what does it do? It richly describes the beautiful form of Krishna. And then the bold assertion, Krishnat param kim api tattvam aham na jane. I know of no reality higher than Krishna. So it's a little perplexing. Beautiful verse, but why there? Madhusudana's disciple, Brahmananda, wrote this in his commentary on that part of the Advaita Siddhi. While the master is a Jivan Mukta, even though he's a Jivan Mukta is someone who is enlightened, liberated in this very lifetime. So he's liberated, he has moksha, mukta in this lifetime. That's the end of the whole process of Advaita. Even though he's a Jivan Mukta, he remembers Sri Krishna because of the impressions of worship performed in the past. That's one explanation. I'm not sure I'm totally satisfied with it, but it shows that even his disciples were trying to figure this out, which is interesting. Madhusudana himself taught that bhakti was possible even in the state of liberation in life. Now you may say, well, why not? But again, in this particular school of thought, the Advaita, there is a radical identity of inner self and this formless, infinite, impersonal Brahman. So why would someone who's attained that identity, as Shankara said, bow down to anyone? Madhusudana says it's natural, like they're being free of hate. Even those who are liberated enjoy worship, devotion to the Blessed Lord. I'm going to take a little detour back 8 centuries to Shankara. This is a few little bits from his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Shankara, obviously 8 centuries earlier, lived in a different age. The big problem that Shankara was trying to address was a conflict between Vedic ritualism and renunciation. And he took as the key to his interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, the idea that it's all about renunciation and the path of knowledge, not about ritual action. So he says, in sum, the Gita is aiming at the complete cessation of the experience of birth and death, namely liberation. This is attained by the path of knowledge, preceded by renunciation, karma, sannyasa. That's his sort of hermeneutical, his interpretive key to the Bhagavad Gita. And we've already seen this verse, this passage. This is actually a part of the commentary on chapter 12 of the Gita. It says, those who meditate on the imperishable are independent. Those who meditate on the nirguna, the attributeless ultimate Brahman, are independent in their attainment of liberation. Others, the devotees, are paratantriya, dependent on the Lord. But why would anyone bow down? Why would anyone want to be dependent who already knows himself to be the ultimate being? It's not very fertile ground for any sense that devotion is ultimate here. Not very fertile ground at all. And Shankara's teaching indeed is that the yoga of action, worship and through your daily life, and the yoga of devotion, worship of a deity, are preliminary methods to purify the mind for the yoga of knowledge. So it's all about knowledge, and what we're talking about when we're talking about knowledge here is the direct realization of one's identity with Brahman again. It's not knowledge in terms of stuff you might get from Wikipedia, okay? It's the direct realization of Brahman. That is Shankara's premise. And notice this, he takes, if you ask Shankara who is Krishna, and what is the relationship between the knower of reality, the saint, and Krishna. Vasudeva is the self. Vasudeva being a name of Krishna. And the knower, the Jivan Mukta, the enlightened saint, has the idea, I myself am the blessed Lord Vasudeva, nothing less. So that's the Advaita, the non-dualism. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Vasudeva. All right. Back to the 16th century. And this is a great translation by Swami Gambhirananda of Madhusudana's Gita Gudartha Dipika. Again, the light on the hidden meaning of the Bhagavad Gita. So what is the hidden meaning? Madhusudana says a lot. It's a very rich commentary. You know, it's a pound and a half or more if you pick it up. It's a commentary on the Gita that you could study over 6 months, you could study over a lifetime. It's immensely rich. We're just focusing in for the purpose of this short talk. Not that I have comprehended the whole thing, but for the purposes of this talk, let's focus in on this. It's a disagreement. Now, the Orthodox Advaitins don't like to think that Madhusudana and Shankara would be disagreeing, but it seems to me that they are. He says, the state of having me and he's speaking using the voice of Krishna. The state of having me as one sole refuge, mad eka sharanata, is the only means to moksha. Not, as Shankara says, performance of action or, in Shankara's case, the renunciation of action. He says this several times. Okay? here where he's speaking with his own voice, he's speaking of the state of having the Lord as one's sole refuge. Bhagavad-Gītā Sharanata. And we could spend a whole afternoon, and each of us could spend a lifetime trying to figure out what having God as one's refuge means. But basically, the Bhakti attitude is a life in which every particle of your existence is completely offered to, surrendered to, in tune with God, and being dependent on God for everything. To use the language of a German theologian, Paul Tillich, God is your ultimate concern. Okay, so it's prescribed not for sannyasis, for everybody, the student, householder, retiree, renouncer, the 4 stages of life in Hindu thought. And same thing here. Bhagavad-Gītā Sharanata is the Paramam Rahasyam, the greatest secret of all the scriptures, the final teaching of the Gita. And dig at Shankara again. Without it, even renunciation will not deliver its final goal. A little bit later, he talks about more about this taking refuge. Sharanata, being utterly dependent on God. There's, you can read it, 3 stages. And here he is, he's re-emerging as an Advaitin, as a non-dualist. I am his. I belong to God. That's a fairly conventional devotional attitude. All devotional schools would accept it. He is mine. That's pushing it a little bit. You find that kind of expression in many of the Bhakti poets who sort of wrestle with God and argue with God. God is mine. Not I'm his, God is mine. Okay. And also those who worship the baby Krishna would have that attitude, right? Little baby Krishna, I'm taking care of him. He am I. Where is it? Yeah. So that's provocative. What does he exactly mean? Well, he says, stay tuned, read my other book. Like many professors do that. As I have explored in a different article, which you should read. So he refers us to the Bhakti Rasayana.
Yeah.
To understand that, which is a good segue, I guess, to the Bhakti Rasayana. So obviously this was an earlier work. This is referring to it in the Gita commentary, the elixir of devotion. Now I'm just going to run through the main teachings. Again, this is a long and erudite work. It has verses with Madhusudana's own tika or commentary. So he's definitely a non-dualist, right? The Blessed Lord, Bhagavan, Krishna, is the non-dual self and mass of perfect being, consciousness, and bliss. So on. Everything other than Vasudeva, again, Vasudeva is the name of Krishna. Everything other than Vasudeva is unreal, a product of Maya. Vasudeva is the only reality. He's the self. So he's got a pretty strong sense of non-dualism going here. And here's where he gets innovative. We don't know what exactly he's trying to accomplish here. He may be trying to open up a separate path for non-sannyasis, for householders. Perhaps that's what he was trying to do. Because for his tradition in his day, the path of knowledge was only open to sannyasins, to renouncers, to monks. And they, sorry ladies, were always male, with some rare exceptions. It's changing nowadays. So maybe he's trying to open up something, but he's saying, okay, there's two paths: knowledge of reality, preceded by disgust with worldly things, renunciation and detachment, for those whose minds are unmelted. It's a big term. This idea of the melted mind is a big term in this text. And the melted mind is a sort of a heightened state of emotional and devotional sensibility that the devotee has in respect to God. The sannyasis, they're boring intellectuals, retired professors. You know, they don't have this bhakti thing going. They don't have this melted mind and heart. Bhuta, chitta. They don't have that. But for those whose minds are melted, there's devotion evoked by the spiritual disciplines of the Lord's devotees, the Bhagavata dharmas. And that is an independent path. The text asserts to moksha. And Shankara wouldn't have it. Unacceptable to the mainstream Advaita tradition. But interesting. What is bhakti? Again, we're talking about the melted mind. The melted mind takes on the form of Bhagavan. And what is the form of Bhagavan? An immediate realization of the highest bliss. He's gone through a long argument here. You know, they have to prove everything. He's trained as a logician, but proving that Bhagavan is the highest bliss, and so on. But the melted mind, this emotionally sensitive mind, in a state of religious ecstasy, takes on the form of the Lord. In Indian psychology, that's how you know something. You see Professor Sthaneshwar here, and your mind takes on his form. You see a camera, and your mind takes on some of the form of the camera. Here, you're taking on the form of Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord. The creation of such a vritti, a mental modification, the creation of that is the aim of all religious disciplines. Now he takes it up a notch here. Okay, so you're going to be a devotee of Krishna, not to worry. In the process of devotion, Brahma Jnana, knowledge of Brahman, is included. It's a complete package here. Okay? An extra added bonus. Okay. So, the sixth stage, he talks about 11 stages of devotion. He's a pundit. He likes to make everything systematized. So the sixth stage of these 11 stages, and there's still like 5 more beyond it. The sixth stage is direct realization, this sakshakara of the essential nature of the inner self. Atma-jnana, knowledge of self. And the interesting thing is, he says, that realization of the self is a preliminary to higher experiences, deeper experiences of bhakti. It clears out all the egoism, all the negativity, all the selfishness, all that. If you don't get this, your bhakti won't flourish because of other distractions, sensual distractions. If you're in any doubt of what he's talking about here, he says, this experience is the same as the realization of Tattvamasi. In the Upanishads, the great declaration is Tattvam Asi. You are that. You are Brahman. And that is, the realization of that truth is what triggers the ultimate experience in traditional, conventional Advaita for the monks. You get it as an incidental byproduct of Bhakti here. And because this generates an intense detachment and a purification of mind, that generates an increase of ecstatic love, prema, for Bhagavan. So again, knowledge is preliminary to the highest stages of bhakti. And it goes all the way up to the Madhura bhakti, the prema bhakti of the gopis. Incidentally, if you read any texts on Vedanta, they're always quoting scripture. The scripture is their proof texts. They're showing that they are authentically expounding divine revelation. They're always quoting scripture. Usually they quote the Upanishads, right? If you read any Vedanta literature, Upanishads, that's big. Or maybe the Bhagavad Gita. What text do you suppose that 90% of quotes here are from? Not even the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavata Purana. So he's gone in wholesale on this thing, okay? He's really, how many other Advaitins have written
Nobody
commentaries
did that.
on Bhagavad Gita? On the Bhagavata Purana. Bhakti is eternal. It's ultimate. It's enjoyed equally all times, all places, all bodies, through all sense organs, just like knowledge of Brahman. It's not perishable, it's not contingent. Being eternal, Bhakti is Parama Purushartha. What's that? Purushartha, if you take an ABC course in Hinduism, you'll learn that one of the main teachings of Hindus is the four goals of life. Okay? The four Purusharthas, the four goals of human beings, which are dharma, religious duty, kama, enjoying the ethical pleasures of life, artha, having enough wealth to survive and take care of your family, and of course, moksha. And Madhusudana is jumping on board with the devotional schools of his time and saying, wait a minute, bhakti is the real purushartha, the real goal, the real end of human life. And there's a long discussion between means and ends. Bhakti is not a means to something else. It's not a means to moksha. It's not a tool to get you to moksha. It is the ultimate end in itself. Why? It's supreme bliss. And just to end up, here's a wonderful description. And now we're back to the Vimarsha commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. A wonderful description of the experience of the liberated Jiva Mukta experiencing non-dual bhakti. The saintly ones who have me as their sole refuge, they see me alone, Vasudeva, beautiful description, essence of infinite beauty, beyond the creation of all this world. Passing their days thinking constantly of me as such, their minds are immersed in the great ocean of bliss, which is prema for me. So he's here speaking with the voice of Krishna. These are the words of Madhusudana. Well, that's a rushed journey through complicated terrain, but very interesting terrain. I hope we can discuss. Thank you.